and welcome to this week's episode of An Interview in History. This episode takes place in March of 1912. Our guest is that famous Irish author and is best known for the Gothic novel Dracula. He is none other than Abraham Bram Stoker. Hi, Mr. Stoker, and thank you for joining us today.
My honor, sir.
How would you like me to address you?
What would you be meaning?
Sorry. Would you prefer me to call you Abraham, Bram, or Mr. Stoker?
Oh, heavens. Call me Bram.
Okay. Thank you, Bram. Can you tell us a bit about when you were born and your family?
Of course I can. I was born on 8 November 1847 in Dublin, Ireland. My parents were Abraham Stoker from Dublin and Charlotte Matilda Blake Thornley, who was raised in County Sligo. I was the third of 7 children. There's Thornley, George, Thomas, Matilda, Margaret, and Richard.
I understand that as a child you were quite sickly. Can you talk about that?
Certainly. As a child I was so sickly as to be confined to my bed for much of my first 7 years, subject to bloodletting and not expected to live. I spent much of this time watching the lives of family and neighbours from my bedroom window and listening to my mother's stories of Irish history and legend. I was naturally thoughtful, and the leisure of long illness gave me opportunity for many thoughts that were fruitful according to their kind in later years.
That's really interesting. Now, obviously you recovered, and from what I can see, quite well. What happened next?
After my recovery, I grew up without further serious illness, even excelling as an athlete at Trinity College in Dublin. I graduated with a BA in 1870 and paid to receive my MA in 1875. I was named University Athlete, participating in multiple sports, including playing rugby. I was auditor of the College Historical Society and president of the University Philosophical Society, where my first paper was on sensationalism in fiction and society. I became interested in the theatre while a student through my friend Dr. Monsell.
Oh gosh, you did recover very well and had an amazing college life. What happened next?
I worked as a theatre critic for an Irish newspaper and wrote stories as well as commentaries. I so enjoyed travelling, particularly to Cruden Bay in Scotland, where I set 2 of my novels.
Where was your first job?
That would have been working for the Irish Civil Service. I became the theatre critic for the Dublin Evening Mail, which was co-owned by Sheridan Le Fanu, an author of Gothic tales. Theatre critics were held in low esteem at the time, but I attracted notice by the quality of my reviews. In December 1876, I gave a favourable review of Henry Irving's Hamlet in the Theatre Royal in Dublin. I was invited by Sir Henry Irving for dinner at the Shelbourne Hotel where he was staying, and we became friends. Ultimately, I became the personal assistant of actor Sir Henry and business manager of the West End Lyceum Theatre, which Sir Henry owned. I also wrote stories. The first, Crystal Cup, was published in the London Society 1872, followed by The Chain of Destiny, in 4 parts, in the Shamrock. While a civil servant in Dublin, I wrote the non-fiction book The Duties of Clerks of Petty Sessions in Ireland, which has remained a standard work. Furthermore, I possessed an interest in art and was a founder of the Dublin Sketching Club in 1879.
Well, it's hard to keep up with your life, and it was all just beginning. Now, I know you are married. Can you talk about that?
Dear me, yes. In 1878, I married Florence Malcolm. She was known as one of the most beautiful women in Dublin. I understand that before you, she had quite a famous suitor. Yes, that would be Oscar Wilde. I had known Oscar from my student days, having proposed him for membership of the university's Philosophical Society while I was president. Oscar was upset at Florence's decision to leave him and marry me, but I later resumed the acquaintanceship. Tell me a bit more about your work at the Lyceum. Well, we moved to London, where I became acting manager and then business manager of Sir Henry's Lyceum Theatre in the West End, a post I held for 27 years. On 31 December 1879, our only child was born, a son whom we christened Irving Noel Thornley Stoker. The collaboration with Sir Henry Irving was important for me, and through him I became involved in London's high society, where I met James Abbott McNeill Whistler and Sir Arthur Conan Doyle, whom, as it turns out, I am distantly related. Working for Sir Irving, the most famous actor of his time, and managing one of the most successful theatres in London, made me a notable and busy man. In London, I also met Hall Caine, who became one of my closest friends, and I dedicated Dracula to him. In the course of Sir Henry's tours, I travelled the world, although I never visited Eastern Europe, the setting for my most famous novel. I enjoyed the United States, where Sir Henry was popular. With Sir Henry I was invited twice to the White House, and I knew William McKinley and Theodore Roosevelt. I also met one of my literary idols, Walt Whitman. So, since you brought up your novel Dracula, let's get into that work. Where did that idea come from? I visited the English coastal town of Whitby in 1890, and that visit was part of the inspiration for Dracula. In addition to Whitby, there were other inspirations to the story, which included a visit to Slains Castle in Aberdeenshire, and a visit to the crypts of St. Micah's Church in Dublin. Did you visit Transylvania as well for inspiration? No, I never travelled to Transylvania, but while researching and drafting Dracula, I did make frequent trips to the London Library. Wait a minute. You never went to Transylvania? That's incredible. No, I didn't. The nearby Slains Castle provided the visual palette for the descriptions of the Castle Dracula during the writing phase. A distinctive room in Slains Castle, the octagonal hall, matches the description of the octagonal room in Castle Dracula. But Bram, didn't I read somewhere that Dracula was inspired by conversations with a Hungarian writer? Well, the writer that you're referring to is Armin van Buuren. But there had been nothing in my conversations about the tales of the terrible Vlad Dracula III that are supposed to have inspired me to equate my vampire protagonist with the long-dead tyrant. I spent several years researching Central and Eastern European folklore and mythological stories of vampires, and I borrowed only the name of Dracula from Vlad Dracula III. That's fascinating. Wasn't the book supposed to be taken as a series of letters? It was written as a collection of realistic but completely fictional diary entries, telegrams, letters, ship's logs, and newspaper clippings, all of which added a level of detailed realism to the story, a skill which I had developed as a newspaper writer. However, at the time of its publication, Dracula was considered a straightforward horror novel based on imaginary creations of supernatural life. I also understand that you were quite a political liberal. Can you tell us about that? Absolutely. I was raised a Protestant in the Church of Ireland. I'm a strong supporter of the Liberal Party, and I take a keen interest in Irish affairs. As a philosophical Home Ruler, I support Home Rule for Ireland, brought about by peaceful means. I remain an ardent monarchist who believes that Ireland should remain within the British Empire, an entity that I see as a force for good. I am also an admirer of Prime Minister William Ewart Gladstone, whom I know personally and supported his plans for Ireland. Okay, one last question. Dracula is such a great novel. Do you have one favorite line from the book? Oh my, there's so many. But if I must pick just one, then it would have to be, "Listen to them, the children of the night. What music they make." Love that line. Bram, thank you so much for spending time with us. I look forward to new and exciting stories. Bram Stoker did not complete any new novels at this point in his life. After suffering a number of strokes, Stoker died in London on the 20th of April, 1912. Some biographers attribute the cause of death to overwork. His death certificate listed the cause of death as locomotor ataxia, a progressive disease of the central nervous system, and makes it difficult to control body movements. So join us next week as we talk to P.T. Barnum, an American showman, businessman, and politician. Until then, take care.